Hey, this is the Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer, powered by 6 Hour, Never Settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carry the best of 6 Hour. I recommend you carry the best. And by the way, this week, I've got a really sweet SIG knife. Who doesn't want to be able to, use 6 Hour's great technology to defend yourself? So I highly recommend defending yourself, and I recommend when you do, you use 6 Hour to do it. There you go. We are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also on the podcast network. Check us out, Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.com, and on all the social media sources on the planet. So this week, without further ado, we're joined by my friend Andrew Langer. Andrew is the president of the Institute for Liberty, as well as director of the CPAC Foundation Center for Regulatory Freedom. And who doesn't want regulatory freedom? And he does a highly rated program on WBAL News Radio 1090, which I often join him for. Right, Andrew? Welcome to the Hard Truth.
Always good to be on, and always good to have you on as a guest, and to have the tables turned here, Tony. And for those of you watching, I'm sorry if I look a little jaundiced. Not sure why that is, but we'll figure this out at some point.
No, it's okay. We're the day after Halloween, and I'm sure that you were enjoying being whatever you were yesterday. And I'm just saying, if you were a Klingon, that's okay. But in my book, I don't care. Those things. What happens?
Former,
go ahead. No,
I was a former gifted student, Tony. That's what I went on for Halloween. I went as a former gifted student. So people walked up to me and said, "Who are you supposed to be?" And I would turn around and say, "Well, yes, that's exactly the way. That's exactly what I keep asking myself is who was I supposed to be?"
So, I talked about another former gifted student named Tony Blinken. Did you know that when he was a band member, his name was Spanky Banana in college? Did you know that?
Why am I not surprised?
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good story. So we'll stick with the story, because the story is, if the legend and the man are not the same, always print the legend, right? So the legend of Spanky Banana is something that we all want to talk about, right? Who doesn't want to talk about that? Yes. So what we do want to talk about today on the radio show, obviously we're very topical. We want to talk about a number of issues relating to current events. You and I talk about them for your audience all the time. And today, we never have enough time to break it all down, do we? I mean, we're trying to get things in what, 5 minutes or less?
Yeah, 8 minutes usually. Yeah, that's right. And that's why these formats are so wonderful, is that we can have these in-depth conversations.
So we're going to focus on the war, the conflict in Israel. We're going to go through a little bit about that today, because I think there's some things you and I have already talked about on air. I want to break out a bit more here. But let's talk about the Soviet Union and some of the issues relating to the Soviet Union, relating to why we're here. Now, I want to frame this properly, because we're not going to say the Soviet Union and the Russians had anything to do with the current Gaza crisis. What we're talking about is essentially a sentiment relating to the Israelis and the Jews. Right. But, for people to understand, and I've had to frame this several times, the basic dispute of territory goes back to 1917, Sykes-Picot. For those who really want to understand a little bit better, it's been dramatized, but in a good way, is Lawrence of Arabia. I've been encouraging people to go out, show it to their kids, give them some sort of context on why where we're at regarding the conflict of land. Basically, the British promised as part of the Balfour's Agreement. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're the historian here. I'm not. Relating to the fact that the British overpromised and underdelivered land. They split up the Ottoman Empire. Right. They and the French, and so the French, running out of horse to eat, had to find borders which were more conducive to their desire. I'm kidding about the horses. They didn't eat horses back then. Well, maybe they did, but it's not my concern. And the British then promised the Israelis the Jews their own land, which has become Israel. And I often have to remind people of the obvious. Jerusalem, it's in the name, Jerusalem. Yeah. So when I start hearing all this, we need to liberate the land from the Jews, I think it's in the name, Jerusalem. I think they predated their presence there before Islam was even solidified, right? I mean, am I wrong? Is that a good summary?
Well, of course, yes. And we should remember that Palestine and the Palestinians, that's essentially a bastardization in no small respect of the term Philistine. It was purposefully used as a way of sort of denying the Jewish homeland that had existed there for thousands of years,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. So, and so in many respects, one could say, in fact, others have said, probably more eloquent than I have, that in point of fact, it's the Palestinians who are the colonizers, the Arabs who are the colonizers, and not the Jews. But again, when we're dealing with the left and we're dealing with the left's view of history, very rarely does it go back more than 2 generations, 3 generations, unless we're talking about sort of historic ills. Then it can go back much further. But this is where we are now.
So I'm glad you framed it that way, because I think so much of what we face, you and I, as colleagues and friends, is the complete and utter constant mischaracterization of history by the left. Right? I mean, they basically will purposely take things out of context for purposes of scoring political points.
And this is where the Russian history, modern Russian history, and the Soviet history comes in.
Exactly.
Because we cannot forget that when Nikita Khrushchev came to the UN and he gave his famous speech that is so often misquoted as him saying, "We will bury you," that what Nikita Khrushchev was saying was, "We will be at your funeral." And what he was threatening is, we are going to use the tools of our foreign policy and our foreign intelligence policy. We're going to use the principles of Western democracy, Western classical liberalism against itself to undermine those values, and thus so undermine, so tear at these values that these nations are going to be indescribable. I don't know how long Khrushchev had in mind, but here we are 60 plus years, almost 2/3 of a century down the road. And what Nikita Khrushchev threatened or promised back in 1960 has borne fruit. And what it means is that when you have the higher education establishment overtaken by folks who are supported by Marxists and who are avowed Marxists, and they are inculcating anti-American values and frankly anti-Jewish or anti-Zionist values into their curriculums.
Right.
And then that gets translated down into not just, post-elementary education, but elementary education as well. And you have these 2 parallel paths where you have successive generations of young people who have been taught to hate America, that America is not the greatest nation on earth. And, oh, by the way, the one liberal democracy in a sea of authoritarian theocracies, that's also an evil empire as well. And of course, the 2 of them go hand in hand, America and Israel. And so that's why you're seeing all of this unrest on college campuses, why you're seeing so many lefties now feeling that they don't have to be guarded in their anti-Semitic expressions on the streets of not just major American cities, but smaller towns, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Tony, I'll just give you an example. My own alma mater.
Please do.
The College of William and Mary. Now, William and Mary, not a hotbed of political unrest. We can talk about all things that go on there. But this past week, and this is not reported really anywhere, the president of the university, who's married to a Jewish man, someone threw an object through the window of her house on campus with a note attached to it. We don't know what the note said, but you can't separate the 2 things here. This anti-Semitism on these campuses and elsewhere is a real problem.
So I want to talk about more again in that direction after we get through the foundation we're establishing right now. But one of the things I want to note and talk about later is the fact you have Jews joining Hamas. I mean, you have Jews who are out tearing down. So I want to talk more about that psychosis, because it's like the political left in the universities you're talking about, plus the Jews who are actually saying, Hamas is on the right side of history. Do they not understand they'd be the first ones murdered and put to death by the very people they're trying to support?
It's funny because I've had these challenges when I've talked to avowed Marxists who've come out of privileged communities before, and you get challenged by these things. And understand, Tony, and let me explain to your viewers and listeners. So I have a degree in Soviet studies. I come to my conservative or conservatarian values from anti-communism. That's sort of the foot that I led with, as a late teen going into college. And so when confronting some of these Marxists on college campuses, I'm like, don't you recognize that if there really was a Marxist revolution, if Che Guevara was resurrected from the dead and walked the earth here in America, fomenting Marxist revolution, you guys would be amongst the first to be lined up against the wall and shot. Maybe not the first. I would be among the first. You and I would be among the first. But certainly along that road would be the children of privilege who are espousing these things. One of the problems, of course, that the left has is that there's a real tendency towards magical thinking. We saw this during the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, that folks thought that if they had the right incantation, I mean, there really is a mystical sense here, but if they incanted the right words in front of the right high priests or priestesses, that they would be spared from harm. But of course, that's not the way it works. And one of the tragic stories to come out of the October 7th Hamas attacks was the tragic story of this woman who, to her credit, put her money where her mouth was. She was a very pro-Palestinian Jew who had moved to Israel, was living on a settlement, and was advocating on behalf of the Palestinians. Did Hamas care when they came into her community? She may have incanted the words, and we don't know this for a fact, but she probably said, "Hey, I'm on your side. I've been advocating for you." But it didn't matter, of course, in the end. And so the real problem we have. Hold on, Tony. Wait 1 second. I'm sorry to
no. Keep going. I thought you were done.
The problem with American Judaism right now, Judaism amongst the Democrats right now, is you have one group of people who are horrified by this, and they don't know what to do because they've been so thoroughly ingrained to not trust conservatives or Republicans. And then you have another class which is willing to just send up the white flag and say, no, we're good Jews. We support Hamas. We support Palestine. We think that what Israel's doing is nonsensical. And at the end result for either set is the other side doesn't care. Palestine, Hamas, Gaza, there's no caring there.
Yeah, I'm going to put that in a framing. So I'm going to put that in a framing in a second. So let's go back. You mentioned college and your degree. I have 2 degrees, environmental studies and political science, and mostly focus on constitution and international affairs in my political science. And this is not well known unless people read Darkheart. I was actually recruited into a super secret spy program when I was still in college. I was off undercover doing things as a college student in Europe, chasing the sports group Hoffman and RAF, the Red Army faction undercover. Yeah, no, I mean, I was like a warrior in the Cold War. I wasn't just thinking about it, I was doing it. My point, and part of this is circling back to, I actually got stuck my last year doing mock trial, because one of the professors, Jim Walker, I love you, Jim. He's still out there, lives in Phoenix and Scottsdale now, retired and living the good life. So Jim Walker knows I'm doing all this undercover stuff because I have to disclose it. I have to give professors orders, and there I'm off undercover doing things in the middle of Germany, shooting people and things like that. And I'm really not joking about that. So my point being is that, this is 1985. This is the Cold War, and the heat of, this is the Reagan time of the Cold War, where we were doing stuff. That's why, we were doing secret stuff. My point being is that Jim Walker, knows I'm doing this stuff, and he recruits me. Literally, I'm almost like conscripted to join the mock trial team, which I had no. Anyway, long story very short, I've got on my wall up there, we won the 1986 championship in front of Drake University, the National Mock Trial Championship. We beat Northwestern University. It was a great experience. My point being is Jim Walker, Dr. Jim Walker, was a liberal. He was a free speech, traditional, let's teach people to think liberal. Something happened because liberals like him, and I love Jim. I would go back and work with Jim at a heartbeat, even though and he said once, even though we disagree politically, there's no one better I would want doing the hard work of intelligence collection than you. I took that as a compliment, because we saw things very different. But my point to you, Andrew, is he taught me how to think critically and encouraged free speech. What happened to those liberals?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that, and I listen, it's the liberal movement on its own, but the liberal movement as prompted by the Soviets and then later the Russians, right? You and I have talked about this.
Right.
infiltrating and subtly pushing these organizations and pushing the organizations on the outside that are pushing these ideologies. And in the end, right, this issue of cultural Marxism, and I'm not the person who's defined it that way, other folks have, but it allows, in the same way that actual Marxism in any Marxist-Leninist society, regardless of where you are around the world, doesn't book dissent, doesn't allow for any kind of dissent. That's where we are here. And so, you wake up at some point in time, if you're a liberal and you don't recognize it. Listen, this is why the former head of the ACLU says he doesn't recognize the ACLU anymore, because the ACLU doesn't stand for civil liberties anymore. They stand for the progressive ideology in the end.
Well, then ultimately, it's not education, it's indoctrination, right? Is that a good summary?
Right. That's 100%. Yeah.
Because again, I was thrown in the middle of things to learn. It's like, hey, you've never done mock trial, but this is what you have to go do. I wasn't dictated to. It was like, you go figure it out. I'm going to give you some tools.
I knew in college, I knew I had professors who disagreed with my personal political philosophy, but I knew that I did not have to parrot back what they were teaching me in order to get good grades on things.
Right.
And when I've taught, and I've taught at the college level, that is a core value for me. You don't have to agree with me in order to succeed in this class. But, on the fundamentals, there are things that I'm talking about that aren't a matter of opinion. But when things are a matter of opinion, we can obviously disagree on things. When I talked about the regulatory issues. Yeah. So
that's the one thing I think that I will share with you, and I think you get this, and my audience understands it. My job, Project Sentinel, and our effort to support social and do all these things is to preserve the very fabric that gives us the freedom to have the debate, because I think that's what's at jeopardy right now, is that, ultimately where this is all going. But that's for another. Go ahead.
Right. I was just going to say that's for another show. But yeah, and just the one thing I would say is that this is why the parental rights movement is so vibrant right now, because people who are our generation or just a few years behind us, because I'm a couple of years behind you, and people who have parents who are with kids in elementary school, they're a few years behind me. That's why they're all coming up now, because it's not the same environment that we recognize. It is a refinement of the environments in which we were all raised and educated.
Right. And by the way, Andrew, I'm 39. I was actually only 6 years old when I was deploying to Europe in '85.
Well, the
I was
irony,
really undercover.
Tony, is that you were doing the work in real life that I was wanting to do, and then in the middle of my junior year of college, the Soviet Union disappeared, and so I was left with a degree. And of course, Clinton cut the intelligence budget, and I didn't have a graduate degree, so I went in a very different direction at that point in time.
Right. I feel your pain.
But I would have been very bad in the intelligence world because I've got too big.
No, you would not. I feel your pain, Andrew. I had to cut the budget. You know that. That Monica Lewinsky told me to cut it, and I had to cut something. Anyway, back to more serious things. I think you would have been a great intelligence officer. Remember, Andrew, the one thing that's most missing out of the intelligence community is people asking hard questions and trying to resolve things. You would not believe how many times I've been in the room with very senior people and said, what you're saying is complete nonsense based on what I know is going on. And that includes Jim Woolsey. It includes a lot of senior folks from the Clinton days. I'm just saying that was something. But let's get back to current day. So let's imagine, if you will, because we're both not as old as to remember World War II. Let's imagine, if you will, 1944, March. General George Patton is told by his staff they have found a concentration camp, and they roll up on it, as history shows, and they find horrific conditions where the Jews have been butchered, which they're still burning in these great cauldrons. Yeah, and so this gets released to the press. Can you imagine that? This hits the American media, and you have protesters in Times Square from college protesting that we should have allowed the Germans, the Nazis, to do their job to end the Jews. Can you imagine that?
Right. Or that, why are we? Yeah, there are a whole host of things. But it gets back to this issue. It's funny because I was talking with my father about this. Mm-hmm. The other aspect, it's not just the cultural part of society, but you remember the phrase that was born out of the Spanish Civil War, the concept of the fifth column.
Yeah.
And America guarded against that during the Second World War. We took a very dim view. First of all, the concept of the fifth column, which means, you know, a group of people who live in a society and are essentially infiltrating on behalf of a sworn enemy.
Right.
That became synonymous with treasonous activity in America. We have allowed a fifth column to develop in the United States, and it's the, as I said, the anti-American sentiment, it's the anti-Jewish sentiment, etc. And yet, you know, it is become so powerful, this fifth column, that it becomes next to impossible to root it out.
Well, part of the problem is and I'm going to say, it's going to piss off people on the left. I'm sorry, FDR opened that door. I mean, he was far too deferential to the left to include putting members of, I think they were very much loyal to the Communist Party into his administration. I would argue,
Sure.
I love, by the way, I saw the movie Oppenheimer. I think it's a great movie, but it kind of demonstrates the fact that you had lefties who were in high positions of authority. And while I don't believe Oppenheimer was a member of the Communist Party, his acceptance of certain concepts allowed him to make bad judgments on people to work for him, I believe.
I will say this. I listen, I'm a proud graduate of the Ethical Culture Fieldston Schools in New York, which is an ethical humanist high school in New York. It happens to be where J. Robert Oppenheimer went to school, and his brother. And so I've seen firsthand where they learned their values, that while not necessarily, well, the brother certainly was a communist, while J. Robert Oppenheimer may not have been, certainly where the quasi-Marxist leanings came from. But right, I mean, remember, you just talked about George Patton. Remember that Patton recognized the Soviet threat and knew that at some point in time something was going to happen. Why not do it then before they got the bomb?
Right.
Who knows what history would have been like? But there was all of this goodwill, and we were in this alliance with Stalin. You know, a devil's bargain during World War II had to be done. But in the end, you know, we needed to recognize that there was this threat down the road.
Well, and I don't want to go, boy, we could talk about that by a separate show. And, you know, Andrew, we should just have a show about historic relevance to the current things. But, and I'll tell Chris to put that into this queue, because I think that'd be a great discussion about great moments in history where things diverge. I was trying to get, I was trying to get Don Rumsfeld to work with us, and Don was open to it before he passed, God rest his soul, doing a retelling of the Korean War outcome. I would argue much of our malaise in the military comes from the fact we chose not to win Korea. And that malaise is now carried over to us being fully accepting of, oh yeah, we're just going to continue to deploy folks and let them get killed, and let's not worry about winning. Anyway, show for another day. But I think it'd be a great topic to break down. But let's go back to this issue regarding the Russians and Soviets and anti-Semitism. By the fact that I think the fundamental element of the Soviet system is they're godless. The idea is the state is the thing that you must worship, and obviously all religions were essentially banned under the Russian system. And but you're not going to you can remove the religion from the system. You can't remove religion from the people. That's a takeoff on another thing that people say. But so then throughout that time, the issue of Jews being part of the Soviet fabric was very uncomfortable. And I think that prejudicial concept, that the idea that you can be a Jew, but you can be godless, I think that carries over today, because that, I believe, there's a direct line that can be drawn from this the Soviet attitude of, you must, if you're going to be a good citizen, you must ignore your heritage and not be a Jew, to now where Jews are ignoring their heritage and signing aboard to basically not only be godless, but actually sign aboard the other side. Is that a reasonable posit?
I think it's a little bit more subtle than that, right? You know, the assimilation of Jews into American society. We'll set aside Russian society. I guess modern societies, because we saw this. Part of the reason why the Holocaust was able to take root in the way, or the Anschluss was able to take root in Europe, was because you had Jews who had become assimilated. And they were, and again, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm an assimilated Jew, so it's not as though, and I was born Jewish and converted to Christianity. So I guess, you know, folks can make questions about this. But at the end of the day, there's a point where there's a play called Leopoldstadt, which was on Broadway. I don't think it's on, it may still be on Broadway, which focuses on this in Austria and sort of the wide sweep of assimilation and how assimilation drives people away from sort of their religious connections and their faith, and thus their brotherhood with their fellow Jews, being able to band together in terms of defense. And so, assimilation is really a strong part of this. Ethical humanism, I know we got to go, but ethical humanism, which is essentially faith without faith, is an outcropping of Jews who no longer wanted to be, they didn't want to be Jewish anymore. They wanted to be accepted generally, but they still wanted to have some kind of ethical unity.
Well, we could go down that whole path of Sam Bankman-Fried and this whole idea of effective altruism, which is, boy, if you want to be a narcissist and justify being a narcissist, that's the thing you do. Just saying. I mean, that whole SBF thing is that. Anyway, so we got to take a break right now. This is The Hard Truth of Tony Shaffer. We're going to take a quick break and come back for part 2 of the show with Andrew Langer. Andrew, boy, I mean, we could literally talk the rest of the afternoon and on all this stuff. So we're going to have you back. But for the meantime, let's take a break. We'll be right back right after this break. Hey, this is The Hard Truth of Tony Shaffer, part 2, still powered by 6 Hour. 6 Hour, never settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carried the best. I recommend you carry the best, especially since your life depends on it. I would put my life on SIG every time, and I did, and I'm still here. So there you go. Proof's in the pudding. We're on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud Podcast Network. Check us out, projectsentinel.com. And we're on all these social media sites. And so here we are continuing our conversation with Andrew Langer. Andrew is a friend, colleague, supporter of Herb London, Dr. London, and in the old days of the London Center. Plus, he does his own radio show, which I'm often on with him. We always have great conversations. This is one of those great conversations, which we will still never get to, Andrew, everything we want to talk about. But before the break, we were breaking down the linear, maybe not so linear, but the traceable link between the Soviet Union and their anti-Semitic beliefs within the Soviet system to some of the issues we're currently facing regarding Judaism, the issues of Jews not wanting to be Jews and supporting the very organizations which would see them dead. Let's pick up right there. And obviously we got Elizabeth, the effervescent Elizabeth Breckenkamp joining us.
Hello,
and
Elizabeth.
The ever cordial Chris Cordani. Mr. Cordiality. So
cordial,
very cordial. That's right. So so we're going to go through.
If I can, let me draw a brighter. Please. Let me just draw a brighter line here, because when I pitch this to you, it's not just what the Russians and the Soviets were doing in America to undermine America's fabric, but let's not forget that at the height of the Cold War, and we were supporting Israel as our strongest ally. Right. To some extent, we were engaging with the Emirates, and we were engaging with the Saudis to an extent. The Soviet Union was engaged in highlighting every and supporting every anti-Israeli Muslim theocracy in the Middle East, and doing what they could to foment terrorism and foment anti-American sentiment. And so this is the end result of that. So it's not that, and you could call it, Jew hating on the part of the Russian government, or historic, Jew hating there, but it also had its anti-American sentiments. But the bottom line is, this is where we are. So, when you have Hezbollah engaging in these things, when you have, Syria and what's been happening in Syria, when you have the Palestinians, right? You and I have seen this. I give it a good example. In Western North Africa, where you had the Sahrawi people. And the only reason why these are the people from Western Sahara. When the Spanish left Western Sahara in 1974, the Moroccans moved in, and the people of Western Sahara, the Sahrawis, they fled to Tunisia, to Algeria. Algeria was a Soviet client state. Therefore, the Soviets supported the Sahrawis. The Americans supported the Moroccans, and that's just that was the way it is. The point in the end is that the Soviets had this long history carried on by the Russians, and so this problem of the invention of Palestine and the myths that were created there and the chaos that happens in Israel. I lay this all at, or not all of it, but I lay a lion's share of it at the feet of the Russians. And then you see what happened in Dagestan over the weekend, where the El Al flight lands and is swarmed in a riot. That's the face of all of this. The chickens coming home to roost in Russia.
Well, I think Erdogan had a lot to do with that too, because Erdogan is kind of, I think, encouraging a lot of that nonsense, and he's doing it for political purposes.
Right.
But then again, he's playing footsie with Putin and the Russians again too. So it's a great way of framing it, Andrew. And I think that's something I'd like to have the team kind of pick up on from here, is the fact that during the Cold War, everywhere we weren't, they were. That's where the Russians were. I mean, the Russians were very much in with Assad. They were in, as a matter of fact, in the '74 war. There are stories which I find credible, where we had devoted so many resources so rapidly to help the Israelis fight off the Russian-backed Arab armies, which were all equipped by Russian, that we actually had F-4E squadrons literally flown into Tel Aviv by U.S. Air Force pilots, literally planes landing, people getting out of the cockpit, the engines are still going, slapping on Jewish stars over our emblem, and then literally taking off. I mean, I've heard credible stories of that happening. It's like, yeah, we're just going to give them stuff now. But that showed our devotion to their defense. Nixon had to approve that, by the way, and he did. Right. So I'm just saying that there's clear evidence that we have been with them, and I've said this over and over, because I'm like, no, I'm with. Look, I think we had to defend them. I think it's in our interest to defend civilization. They are the civilized person. They are the civilized group. And yet somehow, Putin is getting a big pass on this, because Putin, during the recent issue, actually called let me bifurcate this so I don't get in trouble. Joe Biden's policies are so poor and so poorly received that during the time Biden was on his trip with Spanky Banana, Tony Blinken, over there doing the things that he has to do, Putin was behind the scenes calling everybody and saying, oh, no, I'm the guy that wants to mediate. How do you circle that square?
Think about this. We're in a situation around the world where Putin and Xi are flying under the radar.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where we are right now.
Yeah.
Not a good sign.
So I know you're talking about this before in your interview, how it seems like a lot of the Jewish people in the Democrat Party are actually saying they're in support of Hamas. They're condemning Israel. I mean, just so many things really wrong with that. I don't understand. It almost seems like Jews in America, like you're talking about being assimilated, don't necessarily have to lose your identity when you assimilate, when you live in another country, but they've been so brainwashed, and it's like, I don't understand how. But I was also thinking about my daughter-in-law. She's 36. She's a Russian Jew. When my son first started dating her, and they were teenagers, I remember she has no accent. She moved here when she was really little. Both her parents have really strong accents. They live in Virginia. Talking about being Russian Jews, it seems like a lot of the people who were Russian Jews who felt like they were not being well taken care of in Russia, they've went back to Israel. And I don't really understand how it almost seems like there's like completely separate identities. The American Jews have a different identity than what Natasha has, because she's pretty much given up being Jewish. So I don't know who she supports, and I don't really ask her, because it's family, they don't like to talk about politics. But then, so I can't. I don't. It almost seems like the Russian Jews who moved to Israel, they're now in a new war, and it's like they're a completely different kind of a Jewish person than the people in America. I mean, how do you? That is weird. What do you think about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think some of this has to do with a commitment to faith. Not that there aren't Russian Jews who are here in the United States. And what's really interesting, in fact, we've talked about doing a panel. We've talked about doing a panel at CPAC about a group of because there are a number of libertarian or conservative legal scholars, major legal scholars, who are all Soviet expatriates. And they all came here around, they came here during the Cold War and they emigrated here. And this helps to inform their conservative or libertarian values. That's important. I think so much of this is, I mean, let's keep in mind that we do have a trend in certain quarters away from religion in America generally.
Right.
And for so long, Judaism was in many quarters really a cultural phenomenon as opposed to a religious phenomenon.
Right.
And we have to add into this the left sort of looking differently at it. Again, to come back to my own high school, the Fieldston School where Oppenheimer went, they occasionally will go through these paroxysms of self-reflection. They had a thing that happened a few years back where the school was talking about dividing the kids into what they called racial affinity groups. All the Latino students would gather here, all the African American students would gather there, and so on and so on. And so a number of Jewish students said, well, shouldn't Jews have their own affinity group? And the answer from the establishment in power was, well, no, because Jews can hide among their whiteness, which is just a weird way of looking at it, as though Jews haven't been oppressed. Yeah. And that's a direct quote, by the way. White. So, but that's the thing. So yes, absolutely true. So the point in the end is that you have, Jews that have sort of distanced themselves from the religious side of things, and they don't have their faith to rely on. In fact, you'll see it that a lot of Jews look askance at Jews who are religious, if they're Orthodox. Somebody I know very well, a mentor to me, who he was essentially a culturally Jewish. His daughter decided to become Orthodox and have a kosher kitchen. And he was sort of looked cockeyed at that. And I thought he should have been very proud. So, I mean, I think, in terms of the Jews that do go to Israel from Russia or wherever, when you accept your Israeli citizenship, there are responsibilities that come along with it that make it a very serious proposition. Because it's not just that you are under constant threat of attack, but you also have an obligation to serve the state and serve in defense of the state. So that makes it a very serious undertaking.
Yeah, we did a breakdown with Mary Walter last night on her radio program where we went through, and she had a number of questions about the commitments required. Yeah, Mary was great. And so, but to your point, Andrew, I choose to actually go in a different direction regarding religion. I tell people that I'm a Druid, and who doesn't love the sky-clad ceremonies of naked women dancing around fires, right? Who doesn't love that?
We should all be Druids just because of that.
That's a unifying factor. I think we can all get behind.
Listen, at some point we'll have the conversation of my showing up at a Jewish wedding which became a Wiccan.
Sorry about that. As long as there's an open bar, I don't care whose wedding I'm going to. Okay?
As long as there's an open bar.
That's right. There you go. So, all right, Chris, any questions from you on the stuff?
I have to question. I was going to say this for Tony's takes, but I want to get into this right now. I like watching Congress and the House and the Senate. I like watching Congress squabble over the very idea that aid to Israel and aid to Ukraine should be separate.
That's right.
That only makes common sense. We don't want the government hiding how much goes where. Right. We want to see that. I like this. I like the idea they're moving like this. And I also know that since we've seen a lot of true colors out of academia right now, we see a lot of true colors coming out of the House and Senate when it comes to separating funds and worrying about whether they're accountable to the people or not.
Right.
How's that? There you go.
Sleepy Joe said he would veto that if it was a separate bill. I'm going to veto that. Yeah.
And there are some real questions as to whether or not Joe would make good on it. I think he's been given wiggle room that I think that he's sort of said that they might consider vetoing it. Whether or not he's really serious about this, I think in the end, right, there's a real question as to just how committed to Israel the Democratic Party is as a whole. But you're absolutely right. Listen, you won't get a more a full-throated support of the Ukrainian cause than in me. I think Russia's the bad actor here. But that being said, we have to be accountable. We have to have our funding accountable, and the material that we're sending over, that has to be accountable. And listen, I think the same thing, holds true with regards to Israel. There's no reason why we can't have accountability for Israeli funding, and Ukrainian funding. But the bottom line is both are important, but both are important for different reasons. Therefore, both should be voted on separately. We can't tie the two together because there are different reasons for supporting each.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
I agree. But I think that's why the left wants but the left wants to merge it together. So there's purposes of basically not being able to track anything. And I think it's evil because there are differences and distinctions within the two relationships. And, by the way, and I may be reading ahead here, Chris, I don't mean to ruin if you already put this, but did you see that Tony Blinken had his son dress up like Volodymyr Zelensky over for Halloween it's like,
I saw that. It looked good though. He did look pretty decent as Zelensky.
I think so. As a matter of fact, I wonder if he's already doing bribing his son. I wonder if he starts him early, like at 6 years old, like, hey son, here's $10 million for your college fund. Figure out where to put it. Okay?
There is something unseemly, we're setting aside using kids as political props, which we all disdain, as we should.
Oh yes.
And I say this: if you use your kid to score political hit points, it's almost always going to boomerang around and bite you on the posterior. But in the end, let's talk about political tone deafness generally in this. Obviously, Blinken couldn't show up as Zelensky at the White House Halloween party, but to get his son to do it, I think there's something fundamentally wrong. I think it gets to the heart of what's wrong with this administration in terms of taking these things seriously. And I don't mean just taking the problem seriously, but the political ramifications and what needs to go into this. Remember, the adults, we were promised that the adults were supposed to be in charge. If this is what adult leadership looks like, then give me more mean tweets any day of the week.
Well,
perhaps it would be more appropriate if the son dressed up as Justin Trudeau. That would work a little better.
It's tough. It's tough because of the eyebrows. They keep falling off. If it's going to be true to life, you got the fake eyebrows and they fall off.
Perhaps it would have been more tasteless if Blinken dressed the son up as baby Dr. Valier.
Listen, if I could just inject into this, I got one of those for Halloween. I got one of those LED masks that you can change the picture on.
That's cool.
I like it.
The whole thing. And the eye slits in it are at the right angle to make them look like bushy eyebrows. So me being the Soviet studies person, I went and downloaded a picture of Leonid Brezhnev, and that was I wore that as a mask for a little bit on Saturday.
That's a good one. I hope they all recognized you. That's cool.
Does it create goiter as well? Is the mask help create goiter? Because I'm sure that's something that goes along. I'm sure.
I suppose I could have had something coming up on that.
Oh my God!
I'll tell you, if you really wanted to go virtually incognito or keep people guessing, you could have dressed up as Chernenko. That's the one everybody seems to forget.
Yeah, that's true.
What we didn't forget, though, it's time for Tony's Takes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. Is it that time?
That's right. Tony's Takes is powered by Sig Sauer. Never settle. And I don't settle when it comes to these takes either.
That's right.
There you go.
Settle. All right.
So let's get your takes on this. And everybody, we're doing a round robin with the takes here. So former Trump co-defendants turned turncoats, Sidney Powell, Ken Chesebro, and Jenna Ellis have already, it didn't take very long, have already been screwed after making a proverbial deal with the devil. They should have been warned. A judge rescinded that first offender status for each of them when it comes to privacy and their names on what these prosecutors will deem as when it comes to privacy and the need to prosecute Trump. So that's something. They already lose out in their deal for a little while.
Right.
What's your take, Tony?
So the reason they actually pleaded, which wasn't part of the public disclosure, is they were promised lifetime passes to the Jimmy Carter Presidential Museum. So
who's theirs or his?
Who could turn those down? That would turn, Phyllis Diller into, a saint. I swear to God. So
Bridget Bardot.
Who blames them for giving into that? Who could not resist Jimmy Carter? I just don't know who. So.
Oh my gosh.
There you go.
I like me some Billy Beer.
My heart goes out to Sidney Powell and Chesebro for this. I hesitate to say anything about Jenna Ellis because there's personal animus history there, but in the end,
Oh.
I know for me, I'd love to raise a couple $100,000 in legal fees and then turn around and plead guilty and then have that guilty plea turn around and again bite me on the posterior. But there before the grace of God go any of us, guys.
Yeah, no, I know
Cool.
Sydney. She used to be one of our senior fellows at the London Center, so I've tried to stay completely out of it. I think Sydney made some horrific mistakes, and I've said this publicly. When her Kraken suit, I got to tell you, I looked at this first page of that, and I knew like the context of the experts were like going to Army basic training at Fort Huachuca. Let me tell you, I've been to Fort Huachuca, and going to basic training there in any sort does not qualify you to assess.
You're not a subject matter
election.
expert.
So she made some really bad moves. I think she had too much money. What was that great quote regarding Apocalypse Now from the directors? Like, we had too much money, too many things. Like, she had too much money and not enough time to figure out how to use it properly, because I think she was being well financed. But anyway, suffice to say, I think, I understand what they were trying to avoid, but I think in the end, to your point, Andrew, it's not going to make anybody. It's just an ugly situation for everybody. So
they're just trying to do anything to avoid going to jail.
In the end. Yeah, I guess that's true, but in the end, sort of having the guilty plea to a felony on your record. As I come back to this, I've known some very talented. I've known some very talented election lawyers out there, Cleta Mitchell, Ben Ginsburg, Tim Kavanaugh, et cetera. When you're dealing with an election challenge like this, that's where you go. Honestly, you don't go to Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell. And I said this then, and again, no aspersions on Jenna Ellis. She's has a law degree, which I don't have, but it was well out of her depth, and this is where they got.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about Sidney Powell is, why was she so worried about an expansion NHL franchise? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, look,
I can get it.
I was part of a team that won a case in front of the Iowa Supreme Court, but I'm not going to be fighting legal stuff. Just saying. So
there we go. Here's another one for you, Tony.
All right. This
is funny. Far lefties are in a tizzy now because the renowned hero of theirs, atheist and Marxist Richard Dawkins, during a podcast, denounced the multi-genders non-binary movement as weird, establishing as a biologist, there are only two genders. And the left are taught to look up to this guy.
Horrors.
This must be very tough on them. They've had a rough couple of weeks with this whole Hamas thing, and now Richard Dawkins says something that they're not going to. This is going to be tough on these people.
So am I supposed to comment on that? Is that
what's your take on it?
Yeah. So, well, no, my take basically is like, look, I think we should do a law that if you're going to be a communist, you should look like G.I. Joe down there if you're a guy. I mean, just saying, because most guys who become communists are like G.I. Joe, right? I mean, there's the smooth brained and smooth textured. Just saying. So it's pretty much.
Listen, they went after J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
They went after J.K. Rowling. Richard Dawkins is going to get canceled, and Richard Dawkins doesn't have nearly the fan base or the economic base that J.K. Rowling did. So expect Richard Dawkins to be canceled post haste. In fact, if he's not canceled already.
I don't think he even cares. I got one more. This one's a quick one here.
All right.
Public records. Oh, what was it? It has a public records. Politico obtained apparently some information, public records, saying that New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy dipped into his taxpayer-funded expense account to get this by approximately 12,000 smackers worth of food and beverages during outings, including, get this, a Taylor Swift concert. Now, first, Taylor Swift, I mean, come on, Yawn City. I can understand if it's Leibach or the Boomtown Rats or whatever these kids are listening to, like the Dave Clark 5 or whatever that is. But that aside, I thought this guy was rich. Why is he dipping into taxpayers' funds for the petty stuff?
Well, my first question is,
he's rich.
My first question is, was it a skinny dip? Because if it was a skinny dip, that explains why Taylor Swift will be writing a song about him.
I think her boyfriend wouldn't be very happy now either.
Yeah, I can just hear that Taylor Swift song about a new governor showing up at her dressing room. That's a great song. That song writes itself, by the way. So
It's a hit.
$12,000 is a drop in the bucket. I will say that in New Jersey, the political landscape is shifting over this Hamas attack on Israel and the lack of a coherent response from the Biden administration. Look for that to play into the New Jersey races in another week or so.
Well, it's no doubt with Chris Christie that the basic geography changes just because of the weight. I mean, it's just like, the plate tectonics.
Oh my God.
It's inevitable. It's the weight.
Absolutely.
Oh, he's trying out. He's trying out for his new acting gig, starring in the Dom DeLuise story.
That's right. That's right. He was meant to play that role. Speaking of that, did you know that I was talking to Mary Walter about
jelly this? Out of it?
Yeah. No, I was talking to Mary Walter.
I was just quoting the movie Fatso.
That's true. So no, I was talking to Mary Walter about this because she lives in Jersey, and I said, "Is it true that Chris Christie's going to have frost on him in the morning from the first freeze?" And she said, "No, that's basically stuff from a donut, from a powdered sugar donut." It's like, oh, I guess that's right.
Oh gosh,
this hurts. This hurts. Well, I guess the world
Mary's
doesn't revolve around him,
clips.
but the moon does.
Chris Christie's that guy. When he gets on an airplane, all the airline stewardesses say, "Oh gosh, we're going to have to redistribute all the weight on the plane."
That's right.
He got on.
Oh, this is horrible. You guys are really mean.
I know, we're mean.
If he would put down that donut, eat more salad, he would probably lose some weight. Anyway.
Or my invention, the donut salad. I'm trying to patent this. This is a great idea.
That's a good idea. Tastes like a donut. Is there spinach in this?
Well, I think a dill pickle flavored donut would be great for certain New Jersey people. Just saying. I think that'd be be a good thing.
Like that.
So, all right. So I guess it's time to wrap it up. So it's been another great episode of The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. That's me, apparently. And then Andrew Langer's been our guest. Andrew, it's been great having you for both intellectual discussions and going along with our kidding of certain personalities in the political landscape. And we'll have you back. I'd like to have you back and talk about diversion points in history, where history would have been tremendously different. And I think that we'd have a great discussion on that. And Elizabeth, always great to have you here. And Chris, running the boards and doing the hard things. And I do think you ought to think about going as a Klingon next year. I think you'd be a great Klingon.
I have the forehead.
Today is a good. That's right. Today is a good day to die. That's right. So anyway, well, we'll see you all next week on The Hard Truth. Tony Shaffer. Until then, keep doing the things you do. Ask questions. Think about things. And before you act, try to figure things out and don't be indoctrinated. Just saying. So we'll see you then. And bye for now.